To start, you're going to want one of the sheets of watercolor paper I've cut for you. It is 9 inches by 12 inches. You'll want a 11 by 15 sheet of cardboard, a pen of some sort, and a ruler. You're going to begin by marking off the long side of your page every 2 inches. Make sure you line your ruler up on 0. And remember, when we make a grid on paper, which is what we're doing right now, you have to measure both top and bottom so that you have a starting point and a stopping point for your line. On the edges, the short edges, we're going to measure every 3 inches. So 3 and 6. And then you're going to connect all of those lines. Hi Art 1 students. Today we're going to start looking at how to do a variety of watercolor techniques. To do this, we'll need all the supplies that I have laid out here, although this project will go over 2 days. We are going to start by drawing a grid on our paper and labeling that paper with the 15 different techniques we're going to learn. To do these, we will be using a variety of materials, masking tape, you'll be using paper towel, crayon, Elmer's rubber cement, marker and glue, salt, isopropyl alcohol, we have our watercolor paints, tissue, gauze, a piece of plastic wrap, and some water. Also, we have some brushes that are in our containers here. The brushes are all labeled with a size, and that size corresponds with what you see on the front of the brush. So to get started, we're going to start by drawing a grid out on our watercolor paper. To do this, we're going to mark off the top and the bottom every 2 inches. This is the same that we did our grid portraits. Along the sides, we are going to draw points at each 3-inch mark. And connect all those lines. Once you have your grid drawn out, you'll want to take your list and it shows you which technique should go in each grid. Alright, now that I have all of these labeled, I'm going to take some of my masking tape and just tape down the sides. This will help the paper from getting crumpled as the water goes on there, because the paper will want to stretch. Down in the bottom right corner, I have my name and our class listed. I'm also putting a piece of tape with my name on the board so that no one will take this and claim that it's their own. Okay, I'm going to start, and we will start today with the 6 on the left, so the Crayon Wax Resist, the rubber cement masking, glue embossing with marker, dry brush, a wet and wet, and a pen and ink. To do this, we need to set up our papers. So the first thing we want to do is take one of the crayons you have. I happen to have a white because I feel like this is more magic, but you can use any crayon color you want. And you're just going to draw in a design on the paper. It can be some random squiggles, your name. I like the look of these little snowflakes. I'm going to have some, well, you'll see what I have on here. That one is done. Next, we have the rubber cement. The rubber cement you have to open carefully. It has a brush in it, and it smells pretty awful. And you can use a stencil to put this on, so a shape cut out that you then fill this in with, or you can just do a random little shape. Be careful not to get it in any other section of your paper. If you do, you can wipe it off quickly. In the glue embossing with marker, I'm going to start with a marker, and you want to make some kind of line on there. And I'm only going to do the line about halfway because I'm going to also do some glue without line. Once you have that on your paper, open your glue and carefully trace that line of glue or line of marker with glue. In doing this, the moisture from the glue should pick up the color from the marker. I'm going to, at the top, also do an area of glue where there is no marker below, so you can also see what that looks like. Making sure that it is a solid line. While the rubber cement and the glue embossing are drying, I'm going to take a marker or you can just do a pen and draw in your pen and ink area. In here, I'm going to make a variety of leaves. There are two other areas that we want to add some drawing lines in with, and that is in our monochromatic glaze. Well, three more: the value scales, the monochromatic glaze, and the multicolor glaze. In the value scales, you're simply going to divide this space into 6 squares. And they don't have to be equal. In the monochromatic glaze, we're going to do some diagonal lines. Until we have roughly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sections. And these two will end up being very similar. And then the multicolor glaze, we're going to create 3 kind of quarter circle shapes. So we have one over here, and one down here. And this creates a section of overlap between those 2 circles, these two, and then all 3 in the middle. Now that we have our board of techniques kind of set up, we're going to start painting. To do that, we have to get the paint started. You can see a palette, quite messy on the top, and a range of colors. I don't have black or brown in there. I didn't want to use them for this particular part of it. That's just a personal choice. The first thing you want to do is clean off the lid of your palette. To do that, you want to get your largest brush, some clean water, and all of these brushes are new, so you'll have to wet them a bit to release the glue from them. Okay, now that I have two sections clear, I'm going to start priming my paint. To prime paint, you are just adding some color to, or some water to some of the colors in your palette. So you take your biggest brush and just brush in 3 or 4 brushfuls of water into each pigment color. This releases the pigment in the colors into the water so that we can then brush it on the paper. Okay. Now that those are primed, I'm just going to set this down. Now, as we're still waiting for the rubber, cement, and the glue to dry, and you can see that that glue is picking up that green from the marker wonderfully, I'm going to start with dry brush. To do that, I want to actually dry my brush off. And you're going to choose a pigment. I'm going to start with red. And so you have a brush that has paint on it, but your paper is dry. And you're just looking at the different kind of marks that your brush makes on the paper dry. Dry brush is good for doing things like hair and any plants that have kind of a spiky look to them, anything that has kind of a hard edge. For the wet and wet, we're going to use some clean water and a clean brush and just brush some water on our paper and let that sit for just a moment so it can soak into the paper. Keep moving it around until it's even. Once that's done, you're going to charge your brush, and I'm actually going to switch for a smaller brush at this point. Okay, to charge your brush means loading it up with pigment. Now this brush is fully charged. It's not dripping, but there is as much pigment on it as it can hold. And you're going to just start painting within the wet. This is called blooming because if you see, as soon as you touch the wet paint to the wet paper, the paint moves on its own accord across the paper. You don't really have a lot of direction in it, or you don't have a lot of control over it. And you can mix the color of blooms so they spread into each other. This is kind of the part of watercolor that everyone really enjoys playing around with. And while we let those kind of dry and settle, because this area is still quite wet, we're going to go into our pen and ink. The whole point of pen and ink, this is kind of the, I guess, coloring page of doing a watercolor painting, where you draw your design first and then you're just filling in the areas with color. So I'll start with a straight green. And the goal here is just to make sure that you are staying within those lines that you have created. So you're using the brush on its tippy toes. If you notice, I only have paint on the very tip of that brush. When I say tippy toes, you're only using those little brush strands that are at the very top of the brush. And you can notice that I used a water-based marker to draw these out, because that's starting to bleed into the paints in some of these areas. If you used a ballpoint pen or a Sharpie, you wouldn't see that happening. Now that those three are done, I'm going to hop back to my Crayon Wax Resist. And to do this, I don't want to use a solid color straight out of the palette. So I'm going to mix some blue, I'm going to use a lighter blue, in the top part of my palette. And I'm just going to throw some water in with it so that it's not such a straight pigment. I want it to be a little more translucent. And I'm just going to go ahead and brush that all over this Crayon Wax Resist. And you can see as I do this that no paint sticks to the area where the crayon is. The wax propels the water off of it. So now you can see my little snowflakes. If you wanted to, you could do some blooms in here too. Okay, and that's all we're going to do for today. Now to do this, we want to make sure that the paint and the other areas of our paper are dry. Because for the graded wash and the variegated wash, we're going to have to actually tip our board up to get the paint to move along the paper. To do this, you want to use a flat brush. I would not recommend your largest brush because our area here is small. If we were doing more of the paper, you'd want a larger brush, but for this, kind of stay small. A graded wash is a wash that starts light, or starts dark and moves to light. So it is a change in value. To do this, you're going to start by loading your brush with a pigment. I'm going to start with purple so it's charged. Tilt your board up and start at the top of your paper and draw a line of pigment. Then you're going to dip your brush in water. Start at the opposite side, so if you started on the left this time, you're going to start on the right and draw your brush across the paper. Then you're going to put your brush in the water, opposite side again, so we're starting at the left again. And I still have quite a bit of water on my paper here, so I'm not going to charge my brush again with water. I'm just going to continue to draw it down. And you continue to rinse your brush and alternate the sides that you draw this down from. Until you get to the bottom of your square. And then you need to keep your board up for just a couple minutes so that the color can continue to draw downwards. You can see it moves nicely from a dark wash down to light. This is really nice for skies and for lakes. The variegated wash is going to see us doing the same thing, and you want to choose colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. So you can do red to orange or yellow, or red to purple, blue or purple. However, you wouldn't want to mix the red and green. Stay away from that. And we're going to actually do, we're going to start with green, and we're going to move that down to a blue. So first charge your brush with one color, and you're going to do a wash in the same way, going left to right. Rinse your brush, keep pulling the color down. don't think I charged my brush enough. And you're going to pull it about 2/3 of the way down the paper. Then we're going to turn the board upside down with a clean brush, charge it with the next color that you're going to create your wash with, and start on the opposite side of the paper and draw that down. And they'll overlap in the middle so that in the middle the two colors blend together. Those are the washes done. We will hold to the splatter until the end since we have to cover all of the other sections here. And we're going to hop up to our value scale. Now to do the value scale, you're going to need one of those clean areas in your palette. And you will want to pick a color to work with. I'm going to choose orange. And with that solid orange, I'm going to start in the bottom right hand corner and just fill in that square with pigment. Then you're going to rinse your brush, add a little bit of water to that pigment on your lid, and paint the square above. Now, I already noticed two things that are going wrong here. First of all, I didn't start with my orange quite dark enough. You want to make sure that as you're getting this pigment on your lid, you are really working that cell of paint so that you have a lot of pigment in it. So I'm actually going to come back and do my first square over. Rinse off my brush, and I'm adding 1 drop of water to this to redo my second square here. I'm going to add a drop of water to my brush, mix it in, paint square 3, add some water to my brush, to the lid, paint square 4, clean my brush, add some water, step 5, clean the brush, add some water, and step 6. And you'll see as you keep adding water, the pigment lightens within that, and so you have from dark to light. Now, because this is kind of touchy, because it will depend kind of on how much pigment you pick up on your brush, you might have to go back in and pull some pigment out of some of these squares. And to do that, you just add some water to your brush, pick it up, and move on. Or contrary, you can add a little bit of pigment. So that you do end up with a value scale that has 6 different steps of value. I will say this is probably the most challenging square. To do the monochromatic glaze, you need to start with pigment in your lid, and you want to mix that with a good amount of water. To do the monochromatic glaze, we're going to work opposite of the way that we did the value scale. So we're going to work from dark to light. And in this case, glaze just means a thin coating of pigment. Okay. So that with that mixed with a large amount of water, you're going to start by painting the entire square. And again, here you'll see my issue with using a water-based marker. And that's just going to have to be okay. And you want this to be as even as possible. So we are just going to let that sit until it's dry. And we're going to use the same color, come down and paint in one of the circles of our multicolor glaze. And rinse your brush. Our rubber cement masking is now dry enough that we can go over that with some paint. So I'm going to pull some red onto my lid here and mix it with a little bit of water. And I'm going to use that to paint over the rubber cement mask. And you can see the same way that the wax crayon resisted the watercolor paint, so does the rubber cement. I'll show you why this is so cool as soon as this paint is dry. Again, we're still waiting for the glue embossing with marker to dry. You can really see how that glue has picked up the color of the marker. Looking quite cool. Alright, now while we wait on those areas to dry, we're going to come in and do our blots. So we have a tissue blot to do, a gauze blot, and a plastic wrap blot. I'm actually going to do a wet on wet with our tissue blot. So I'm going to start by getting some water on our paper. And then I'm going to charge my brush and put. And now that my tissue blot paint is a little more soaked in, it's the same thing. You want to crumple up your tissue so you have an interesting shape. You don't want it flat. And you're going to use that on the paint, pressing down to create an interesting texture. Gauze Blot, I'm going to do a dry brush, kind of a dry brush Variegated Wash on here in a way. Do red on one side and orange on the other. Kind of blend them together. Now on the Gauze Blot you will need your sheet of gauze, and while it is still wet you're simply going to place this on the color and pat it down into place, and then it will need to dry on the paper. The plastic wrap blot. Some color on your paper. And then you are going to crinkle up the plastic wrap so you have lots of edges and folds on this side. Okay, lots of edges and folds and the edges going against your paper. When you get that down, you're going to hold it in place until your paint is dry. These, both the tissue, or all the tissue, the gauze, and the plastic wrap are all about creating different kind of textures within your paint, as are the salt and alcohol drops. Now the salt kind of works best with the dark color, so I'm going to put some purple in here. And it needs to be done on a damp paint. You don't want your paint to be really, really, really soaking wet, so you don't want to see puddles in it, but you also don't want it to be drying out. And for the salt, I'm just going to shake on some salt onto that area. Now the salt soaks up the pigment and leaves a very interesting texture behind, but you don't want to move it until your paint, paper, and salt are completely dry. For the alcohol drops, you have an eyedropper, and you want to paint on an area of pigment. And this one does tend to work better with darker spaces, so you wouldn't want to do this on like the middle of a wash. It wouldn't turn out quite as nice. And you're simply going to use your eyedropper and alcohol to drip on a few drops. To create the effect you see here. Again, this is kind of a resist because the alcohol resists the pigment, so it sends it to the outside of the drops. Alright, if I look over here, I can see that my multicolor glaze is dry, and so is my monochromatic glaze. So what I'm going to do is, with the same glue I used on the monochromatic glaze, I'm going to pick up more paint and paint on, skipping that top area. I'm going to paint on another coat of paint, so another wash in that area, leaving that top corner blank. I'm working to build up layers of pigment here. More wait time as that dries. And the multicolor glaze, our first semi quarter circle was blue. This next one is going to be red. And I'm just going to paint over the area where I already have pigment. Being careful not to disturb my plastic wrap. Go in, and now that needs to dry. And you can see here some color theory as the blue and the red mixing together makes this lovely purple. Okay, now that the paint has had a while to dry, I have taken the bottle of weighted material down. I'm going to lift out the plastic wrap and you can see what a neat texture is left behind by that. I'll also pull off the gauze and you can see the texture that is left there. Our next move is going to be to add in the yellow on our multicolored glaze. I'm also going to work on the splatter for the wet and wet. I'm going to grab our brush back. We're going to pull in a little bit of yellow. This one I'm not going to mix with any water except on the paper. So I'm going to start pulling in it. Actually, it's enough. And then I'm going to go over everything within this circle. And again, there's our color theory at work, because when blue is mixed with yellow, we get green. When red is mixed with yellow, we have orange. And in the middle, I don't know if you can see it on the video, but we have this lovely gray, which is exactly what should happen when you mix red, yellow, and blue. Coming back to our monochromatic glaze, I'm going to pull more of that pigment from the lid of our piece. Some of the water has come out, so I'm going to add a little bit. And then we're going to skip the second section and build up from the third stripe on. Again, this is just showing you that as you don't have to start out dark, you can add layers of color, layers of pigment to get too dark. I'm actually going to hop back here to my rubber cement. If you had an eraser, you can do this with an eraser. Otherwise, you want to do it with a nice clean hand. But the lovely thing about rubber cement is that I like the word sloughs off the paper. And that should come off. I actually need to find this. It's better to use an eraser than your finger, because your finger, the oils in it will want to move the paints around, or the pigment around from the outside. And you can see that it's starting to bead up along this edge where I'm pulling the eraser along it. And so the rubber cement acts as a mask the same way that we used paper as a mask on our ceramic plates, that it keeps the pigment from getting to the surface. So if you wanted to leave a perfectly white highlight of an eye, or silhouette of a bird in the sky, you might use a rubber cement mask of those shapes. And again, or a cloud that keeps paint from getting to your paper. Now we're going to come in with the splatter, the wet on wet. And we are going to cover up square next to it, ones above it, and those to the side. You're going to get that area wet until my water's a little dirty. And then you want to take one of your round brushes, and you're going to dip that in the color that you want to splatter. and using your finger as something to hit the brush against, you're going to gently tap your brush against your finger. Move this up so you can see the motion more. I'm going to switch colors. And so I'm using the pointer finger of the brush, the hand that's holding the brush, and as I hit it against the finger, I also tap down on it at the same time. To splatter the paint on the page. I'll do this with a couple different colors. And then that one is done. I'm going to come back to my Monochromatic Wash here and do the next section. You can see that color is really building up.